Cisco engineers totally lorded over them. Cisco CCNAs will talk about subnetting and then smear at MCSEs. There's like a cats and dogs thing going on there. But you do learn the basics of networking in Windows machines. So we're talking about work groups here without a domain controller. Domain controllers are pretty much reserved for the server classes. So that's what we have in this room. You know, just a bunch of machines connected together with switches or routers, no server. Although you can have a server in a work group, and it's called a member server, but it's not, nobody's in a domain, which means all the accounts are local, and there's no central point of administration. So any computer can join a work group, but only Windows 7, at least Home Premium, can create a home group. All right, but home groups turn out to be pretty unreliable in practice, so I don't know how many people really use them. How many people are using home groups? I used to use them, but I finally got tired of it. It has a lot of bugs, really. Maybe in Windows 8 you can get it working, maybe Windows 9. Windows 8 has a pretty nice home group with Windows 7, but anyway.
Well,
yeah.
Do you have an alternative way to share between the 7 machines at home on a LAN?
Well, you've got Dropbox and such, but it's not really the same. Home groups really are nice at home.
Yeah.
But when we bought new machines, our old machines worked in the lab. When we got newer Dell machines, newer HP machines, they weren't home group. So it's pretty rude. It seems like it's dependent on your hardware, your network card or something. Very often when you try to set up home groups, they just don't work. So this is usually the case with every Windows version. Whatever the new networking feature is, it only works half the time. It's not until the version after that that it starts working. So I imagine Windows 8, maybe home groups are actually working. If there's anybody that actually has multiple Windows 8 machines voluntarily they're trying to share, I've never met anybody like that. The only people I know with Windows 8 are people who bought a new machine and they haven't figured out some way to get rid of it. Anyway, so obviously you need a network. You want to share the printer, you want to share the internet connection, and so on. Microsoft bet several times on thinking people actually wanted to share media so much that they would pay for a Windows home server. And that's one of the many Microsoft products where they always dodge the question when you ask, how many of those did you really sell? Does anybody have a Windows home server? I believe I once had a student that had it once in like the past 3 years. So it's like those tablets, the ARM tablets. How many of those did they sell? Microsoft's been dodging the answer to that, but they had to write down $1 billion loss on manufacturing because nobody wanted it.
Wow.
And the same thing with Windows Home Server. Microsoft has a lot of spectacular failures, and about 1 product in 4 is a big hit, and they keep going. It's like most movies, right? Bunch of flops, then a hit, bunch of flops, then a hit. You can make it that way. That's what they've been doing. So home groups are new. They really are nice when they work. Your machine is location aware, so it knows when you're home, and then it automatically shares printers and files and everything. And when you're not at home, it doesn't. And it automatically creates a password, so it's really quite secure. Your neighbor getting on your Wi-Fi is not going to be able to join your home group. Wi-Fi protected setup is a field something Microsoft's been proud of in Windows 7. And I thought it sounded good when all I read was the Microsoft literature about it. And then I read the hacking literature and found out it's a horrible idea. It makes your machine completely insecure. It makes your wireless network completely insecure. Because the idea is it automatically configures WPA2, and it automatically transmits the WPA key. You press a button on the router and a button on your NIC, and it sends the key. So it should be possible to have what you ought to have had, like a 20-character random key. It's too hard to type in. But in fact, it's an 8-digit numerical key, which is really composed of 2 4-digit fields, and one of them is a checksum, so there are only 10,500 possible keys, so you can just try them all with brute force that. The hacking tool called Rigor that will do that. And any WPS protected network might as well just be open. It's trivial to just hack right in. It's a bloody shit. Anyway, they have mobile support for 3G networks. They have direct access and branch cache. These are server-oriented features. Direct access is supposed to be an automatic VPN. So even if you travel to Starbucks with your corporate laptop in a domain and log in, you can just automatically connect back home in some secure way over IP version 6. I've never been able to use it. Anybody tested this? Yeah. Maybe up in the server classes we'll test it. I wonder if it works. That would certainly be attractive. Most companies, I think, still use third-party products like a Cisco VPN concentrator and Cisco software and all their traveling laptops. But Microsoft has their version of this, but you need to have a Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controller and so on. And enterprise or ultimate, so that means pretty much no one's going to use this except major corporate customers. Branch cache is actually quite useful. I've heard a lot of people use that. This is what you do if you have like a local office in a part of town where there's only a few employees and nobody there knows anything about computers. And yet you want to have a local machine so they get good performance. So you can make a branch cache file server and it will have copies of your shared files, but they can't change them. They can just access them faster. You can also have a read-only domain controller, which is a domain controller there so they can log in faster, but they can't mess anything up. So this is what you do. This is how you provision a location where there's nobody no network administrator on site without a risk. Now the next thing is this new in Vista, the TCP/IP stack was entirely rewritten. The TCP/IP stack in Windows XP and earlier was abandoned and rewritten. The big thing about this is it has to be IPv6 first, which is what should happen according to the RFCs. Every computer in the modern world should attempt to connect over IPv6 and only connect over IPv4 when that fails. Unfortunately, Microsoft introduced a lot of new bugs in the TCP/IP stack, and there were several spectacular errors in Vista, which were pretty much fixed. In Windows 7, they pretty much got it working. This also fixes a really long-standing, embarrassing problem for Windows, which is the SMB file transfer protocol, which they inherited from IBM, is so spectacularly inefficient that if you have a network connected with a 100 megabit per second switch, and you just take a file and drag it from one machine to another with a shared folder, you will observe that it moves at 20 megabits per second. The actual speed you get is 20% of the rated speed, because it wastes so much time if you're having too small a window size. Windows 7 finally got that fixed, and now if you measure, you have like 90 or 95% of the line speed is what you really get. Because it's been one of the many things just waiting for decades for Microsoft to fix it. So it's really quite good. That's called received window auto-tuning. It causes the window size in TCP/IP to tune more efficiently. The previous one would just stay at a very low value and make it waste a lot of time waiting for acknowledgments that weren't necessary. Anyway, so Network and Sharing Center, you see it here. This is where you handle most things. This new window, new in Vista, and it lets you see all the properties of your network connections. If there's a problem with your internet connection, it'll just show an X there, and you can click on the X and it'll run the automatic diagnose, which is pretty nice. That was also there in Windows XP called Repair This Connection, but it's gotten a little fancier. It will try resetting the network adapter, disable and enable. It'll try rolling back, reinstalling the driver. It'll try changing the IP address from manual to automatic. You know, all the stuff you would like to try. ipconfig / flush DNS. It will try like the 10 most common problems automatically for you. All right. And every network you join has a location. Every time you connect to a new network, you'll see this box. It'll ask you, is it home, work, or public? Home and work have the same consequences. The only difference, home and work both have the property that the firewall will be set in a middle state, which allows you to be a server if you turned on things like file sharing. The only difference is home lets you join a home group and share files. Work lets you share files but not join a home group. And public sets the firewall to the condition we were talking about when going over the quiz, where you can be only a client. No unexpected traffic from the outside, so you can't share anything. You can't share your printer, can't share your files. Nobody can see anything on your machine unless you connect to them, which is what you want in a public location like a coffee house. So that's what these things are. But this turns on network discovery. Network discovery is Microsoft's imitation of Cisco Discovery Protocol. This means your machine is actually sending out its information on the network periodically and receiving others and drawing a network map. So you know the MAC address and the IP address and the name and type of device all over your network. I thought it was turned off here. Let's see how it looks here. Because you can really get a fantastically detailed diagram of a network. Network and Sharing Center. If you go to see full map, if you have network discovery enabled, you will see the network map. And we'll just see what it makes of this City College wired network. It could show us quite a lot of good stuff. Okay, that's what I thought. So it shows me here I am with several machines turned on in this room. It even notices that they're connected to different switches which are connected to each other. And if one of them is a hub, it will detect that too. And I once went to a Microsoft event. I tried to get them to explain to me how in the world does it tell a switch from a hub. I still don't understand that. But it does. I had a hub at home and it really did detect. So 2 machines on this switch, 2 machines on that switch, 2 machines on that switch. The switch is connected to each other. The gateway here, if you hover over it, it's got the MAC address of the gateway, the IP address, and these devices down here are ones it could not place on the map. And these are the media server parts, which I don't know why it doesn't place on the map, and this instruction machine, which must have something disabled. And if you have machines on your network that are running something like Windows XP, they'll appear down here. And most routers, older routers that don't have UPnP, because they don't play the network discovery game. So all your machine can do is detect the IP address and the MAC address, and it can't tell which switches it passed through to get there. These guys are somewhere on the network. You can, by the way, add an optional service hotfix to Windows XP to add this feature to XP so it will appear in the map correctly, if you want to do that. Anyway, that's the game there of network mapping. So here, the feature I told you where it protects you from people seeing your file shared is actually done with the firewall. There are three profiles to your firewall: private, public, and domain. Private is both work and home. The firewall is the same in both cases, and that means it will allow exceptions. So if you turn on a Microsoft service like remote desktop or file sharing, it will open the ports automatically. Public profile means it will close all ports. Even ones you have requested to be open will be closed in a public network. The only thing you'll get is things you ask for. And a domain profile means that all your firewall settings will be subject to being overridden by the domain controller. The domain controller can choose to not set the firewall settings and let your local settings take hold, but usually it doesn't. Usually the domain controller will tell your machine what your firewall settings are at our company, and that's it. That's the whole point of domains. Domains will trump all your security settings if they want to. The administrator can choose not to configure them, but they can choose to limit your machine in any great variety of ways from the central location. So your network card, you have to have it's typically built into your machine these days. Wired networks are universally Ethernet these days. Hubs are pretty much extinct. That was the original way to connect machines together with these stupid devices at layer 1 that do not know anything about addressing. They just repeat every electrical signal out all the other wires. Pretty much everybody uses routers these days. Now the actual thing you buy as a router is a combination device for home use that is a combination of a router and a switch and an access point and a firewall, which would be 4 different devices in a rack at a company like the racks back there. But for home use, you just have a miniaturized combination appliance. So this gives you network address translation so many machines can share the single internet connection. It has one special port called the WAN port, which goes to the internet, and it has a switch inside there with many local ports, and typically wireless option too, so you have wired and wireless clients all sharing that one internet connection. All right. Ethernet's always using these 8-wire cables, RJ45. There are other alternatives, by the way, not usually connected directly to a computer, but if you want to go, you can of course use wireless, that's very common. And Ethernet, by the way, goes up to 100 gigs in principle, although most people are now up to 100 megs or gigabit. Companies are often up at 10 gigabits. 40 and 100 megs are really expensive, and only your most extreme companies are going to have those. Wireless is out there. 802.11b, G, and N are the most common types. B was earlier and very slow. G was the standard, and most people are moving up to N. There are a couple more coming. The very newest one is 802.11ac, which is, I think, a gigabit per second or something close to it. And another newest one coming after that is 802.11ad, which I'm really waiting for, because that finally moves to a different frequency range. These are all the old 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz bands that are absolutely full. They're the only consumer unregulated bands in America. But there's a new band coming at 100 gigahertz, which is 802.11ad, and that should make wireless networks much faster. And that was a fundamental physics problem that held that back. There was no chip you could build at a reasonable cost that would generate or receive 100 gigahertz frequency until recently. They finally solved that problem. Now they can manufacture 100 gigahertz devices. You can also move your network traffic through cables that were not intended to carry network traffic, like a phone line. This is what DSL lines do. They take straight 4-wire cable that was supposed to carry an analog phone call, and they just ram network traffic down anyway by having very complicated and sophisticated electronics at both ends that try to overcome the distortion and attenuation of that wave as it travels down a cable that is not coaxial and not even twisted and in no way really designed to be good for this. And because it's just a straight wire, it acts like a radio antenna, and all your traffic is generating radio and leaking out. So it's degrading with distance. And the same thing is true if you run it down just a power line. But if you want to connect like 2 rooms in a big house, and your access point is not strong enough to go through, and you don't want to drill holes in the wall and drag cable, you can use power line adapters. I use them all the time. They're very nice. Like 40 bucks, you get a pair of them, plug in 2 outlets, and you're sharing. It comes with encryption, which is proprietary, and you should turn it on because you have no idea how far it's going. That could very well be going to your other neighbors and stuff. And I had a student that actually came to me and said, I got hacked. I did a trace route in my network. My connection to the internet is going out some unauthorized place. Someone is spying on me. I said, but look, this is only like 2 milliseconds away in the trace route. This is in your building, and that's what happened. His neighbor, his tenant had power line networking, and he was going on his tenant's internet connection instead of his. And he didn't put a password. If you put a password on it, then even though your traffic gets there, it won't get mixed with the other person's traffic. But anyway, they're very nice. And in, I think, Japan, they actually deploy internet service through the power lines. They don't even lay cables. They just run it through the power lines. That's pretty extreme, but that's the thing that will only work if you're in a really nice, dense, big city like Tokyo. Because just like DSL, you can't move anything a long distance through power line with any real bandwidth because it's not twisted, it doesn't have a shield, it's not really designed to carry high frequencies. So you can put your router somewhere in the center. If you want to use internet connection sharing, this is a really old technique. It was recommended by Microsoft in the early days of Windows XP, where a computer would be your router. You'd have two NICs, one going to the internet and one going to your LAN. I think almost nobody does this anymore. It's only like 40 bucks to buy a router. But anyway, you can use a computer as a router if you want to. It's just not usually the most cost-effective solution. The computer is so much more capable, and a hardware router is so cheap. Now I can say there's typical network, usually has all these features. So you've got the internet, you've got a modem of some kind, then you have a residential gateway that gets you in here, and an access point, and a switch to reach the wired clients. And all of these things are typically in one box, or sometimes two boxes, just compressed. And those little cheap ones are, as you imagine, pretty badly made. Home routers wear out fast, they crash easy, they're easily hacked. They're running old versions of Linux, they never get updated. You know, as you'd expect, you get what you pay for. If you pay 200 bucks and get a real Cisco router in a rack, you've got a much better piece of hardware that will carry more traffic, last longer, be harder to hack into, as you'd imagine. All right. So I got a few eye clickers about that stuff. So, what is the device that lets the wireless users on? Best answer is access point. Router is what they call it in the store, but as I mentioned, that's just sort of a marketing sleazy term. The technical term for this function is the access point. The thing they put the name router on is actually a combination device that has many features. And so we're supposed to be technicians that know the difference. This is, by the way, very common in certification exams. There's more than one answer that has some truth, but one of them is the best answer. So be aware of that. And the most common type is like this. There's a large container and a more specific subcontainer, and that's the best. There we go. All right. Which one of these goes at 300 megs? Matter of fact, I think it actually goes up to 600. I'm going to modify this a little bit to 600. When I wrote this slide, the limits weren't as clear as they are now. That's 802.11n, and I ought to mention, I think there are many different ratings of 802.11n. For full 802.11n, you actually have to have 3 antennas on the NIC and 3 antennas on the router, so it has spatial channels. And it will bounce one channel off the ceiling, and one will go straight, one will bounce off the wall, and it moves separate data for each of those. Yeah?
Is AC faster than that?
AC is much faster.
Okay.
So I think AC goes up, I think it's a gigabit, I think.
Okay.
People say it nodding. I think we've gotten the AC. I think the very latest iPhone has AC, and I think, so if you get a home, you know, you have to, latest everything, you can check out AC, it's supposed to be better.
DS4 has AC.
Yes, yeah, but nobody has it at coffee houses or your home.
It's still a draft.
It's still a draft, right? It hasn't been improved yet? Yeah, okay. And AD is,
Galaxy S4.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the very latest personal equipment will have it because they know in a couple of years it will be all over the place. But right now, almost nobody has the routers, although I think you can buy them, but they're expensive. In fact, let's take a look, actually. It's a good thing to know. 802.11 AC. Let's see what's for sale.
Apple.
Like best routers. Okay, here's the
Cisco.
review. And, okay, there they are. It's a review from October, just a couple days ago. And so here they are, $200. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's still going to cost you $200 to get an AC router. That's why I don't have one. And the Apple, of course, has it with the latest version. But it's coming. And I don't think you can get 802.11 AD at all. I think it's still like theoretical. Let's take a look. That they're calling Y-Gig, 7 gigabits. Y-Gig adopted by IEEE, yeah, but I'm not seeing anything for sale yet. I don't think you can buy it yet, but it's coming. Anyway, all right. So you have 10 Windows machines, and you want to convert from a work group to a domain. So what you have to do. All right, guess I'll wait till 45. All right, and just like 802.11ad, this is why nobody does it. You have to buy a new computer and buy server, which is not cheap. You cannot have a domain without server. So you have to buy a computer, install server, and add it. None of the rest of you should get in there.
Wait, I didn't follow the question.
Yeah, you're trying to convert from workgroup to a domain,
Uh-huh.
and therefore you need a domain controller. You cannot do any adjustment on Windows 7 to make a domain. You have to add a domain controller to the network.
Oh, I thought you wanted to convert the machine.
Yeah, see, that's a tricky
So if
question.
you have a
Why?
domain controller already,
No, they
then
don't.
you would just change the machines.
No, this is a small business, and all they have is 10 computers.
You don't have a server.
You don't have enough information, actually.
Well, that's what we're talking about. The small businesses do start with workgroups,
Okay,
and then they reach a point when they grow and become domains. That's all I'm thinking.
okay.
Yeah, it's hard to think at this level. You're probably too advanced because we're real domains. But this is why people.
Yeah, I would just say.
This is why
change the
people don't do
domain.
it. This is why people don't do it casually, because you do have to make a domain controller.
But you can have a domain controller on a virtual, on a,
You could put it on a virtual machine, yeah, but we'd have terrible performance. Yeah. What's up?
So if a company decides to do that, so the computer that the company is getting is just one computer, so they can install the server 2009 and
Yeah.
then they apply the domain.
Yes.
So that then.
Yeah, you have to add a server, and then all the computers on your network have to join the domain.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, anyway, sorry about that.
I thought you were asking, how do you join a domain?
Yeah, I know, well, there's a problem. That's why I make these things extra credit, because they're not perfect. And one big problem, which is really annoying, is it's easy to be too smart for my questions. And that's frustrating. So if, for example, it happens on a quiz, that you give an answer that is correct and I'm too dumb to realize it, always complain. You know, that could happen. When I was just beginning teacher, a teenager in grad school, there was a question on the quiz, about his physics class, a question about how light went through a prism, and there were 1,000 students, and I was design team grading them, and 4 students out of that 1,000 wrote down the right answer and crossed it out and put down something strange. And we thought about it and thought about it, and we realized they were right. There was a fundamental problem with the question. It was very subtle. We forgot to account for the time it took light to pass through the prism. It would mean you couldn't really get the answer. And the boss was in charge, and he finally decided to mark them wrong. And I was really upset. Wait, they're the smartest people in the whole class. You can't not give it to them. They didn't give the answer you expected. That's because they're smarter than all of us. So anyway, be aware of that. If you're smarter than me, that's good. Make sure you don't get punished for it. Anyway, so, all right. So if you want several computers to share the single internet connection, what do you need? Put it 30. All right.
Oh, wait.
You may not like me here, guy. Yeah, you need a router that does NAT. Now, you may not realize this. There are routers that don't do NAT. There are 2 categories. There are really old routers. I've got some of them that only have 2 ports, in and out. That's because the routing function is different than the switching function. And there are Cisco routers and Juniper Enterprise routers, and those things don't do NAT by default, and it is in fact not simple to turn it on. Your home router, again, is custom configured with the most common thing you need, which is NAT. But that's not the routing function. NAT is a separate function. Anyway, it's we'll see if they're also frustrating. Anyway, so security on the network. If you have a wireless network, there's a bunch of risks. And when they first started selling wireless cards, 802.11b, consumers rebelled and didn't want to buy them because they said, look, it's obvious to me that if I'm using wireless, my data is just going all over the place, and that's not safe. You don't even need an expert to tell you that, and that is entirely true. So they invented this thing called wired equivalent privacy and named it that to say, if you use WEP, you are as safe as you would have been using a wire. That is a complete lie, but that is the marketing term they used. Anyway, here's the risks. Somebody could steal your service. They could connect to your internet and use your bandwidth, which isn't a big deal, but it might matter to you, like they could turn on BitTorrent and you hit your bandwidth cap. They could use up all your bandwidth so you don't get any. They could listen to your traffic. If you're in a coffee house and get your password and such, they could take over your network, hack into your machines now that they're on the same layer 2 if they find a vulnerability, and there's a lot of them. So, letting strangers on your access point is generally a poor idea, and pretty much everybody's figured this out now. And Max Butler is the poster child for this. In the Tenderloin of San Francisco in 2006, he got a 4th floor apartment. He had been busted for computer crime several times while he was in prison. He made a deal with his cellmate. They were going to get out and make one big score and get rich and then retire, like they always do. And so he got out, and he was the technical guy. The other guy was the thug gangster guy with guns and stuff. And so he sat in his floor all day and night living on tofu and hacking all the computers in the world. And he was awesome. He took over the Russian forums for stolen credit cards and erased their contents and moved all their members over to his server in San Francisco and became the central repository of stolen credit cards in the whole world by putting them out of business. And he did it all through his neighbor's access points. He had a big antenna, and he would connect to different people's access points in a 4-block radius. And the FBI was tracking him down, and they had a map with pins on it going all around his house, trying to find him. And he did this for years, the biggest credit card number in the world. And the problem is, he got a bunch of money. They had millions of dollars at one point, and his partner was out on the street with like Cadillacs and prostitutes and diamond rings and drugs and stuff. He said, "Okay, we did it, right? This is the big story. Now you're going to quit." And he didn't quit. He said, "Look, they've got enough. Why don't you quit?" And he realized the guy's just an addict. He loves hacking. He won't even spend the money. I tried to get him to go out and party with me. He won't leave. He just stays up there hacking like that. So finally, the partner got stupider and stupider, and they finally caught him buying like a mink-coated Nordstrom high on cocaine with a stolen credit card. And so they busted him, and he rolled over on this guy. That's how they caught him. That's usually what happens. The guy actually spending the money gets caught. So anyway, that's why one of the many reasons why you don't want strangers on your access point, because they will be doing something nasty. So WEP is the original way to protect your network, and it turned out to be a terrible idea. It was just very poorly implemented, so you can in fact crack into a WEP network in 5 minutes without even knowing the key. The key is not encrypted correctly, so you can just crack it. My students do it for homework. And the FBI went around all the security conventions in 2001 cracking into web networks to convince everyone it was bad, so MasterCard and Visa sprang into action, and it only took them 11 years to tell people to stop sending credit card numbers over web. It was still permitted up through 2010, I think, that you could send credit card numbers over web, and that's after all the retailers in America had their credit card numbers stolen twice by the same guy. He the largest computer crime in history, stealing credit card numbers, and then he became an FBI informant, and while he was an FBI informant, he did it again, and made the biggest attack again. So he finally went to prison, and everybody hates him. The FBI hates him, and all his hackers buddies hate him. He got a problem. He betrays everybody. But anyway, they're still sending credit card numbers over web. If you're using web, knock it off. Web is not your friend. Use WPA or WPA2. WPA was originally designed as an emergency stopgap measure to improve the security of web. There are 4 security mistakes made in web which make it possible to crack it. One of them is you can replay packets. Another one is the initialization vector added to a packet before encrypting it is too short, and there's a few others. And they just changed 4 little things to make WPA. WPA is web, but it changes the key for every packet. And it turned out, they thought that was going to only hold for a year or 2 before somebody would hack through it, but it still through 10 years. There's actually nothing wrong with WPA. WPA is fine. But WPA2 was the professional solution. It requires a new router. And almost everybody has a router that's not 10 years old, so your router probably supports WPA2, and that's your best option. But if you use WPA, it's fine. The point of WPA is you could upgrade the firmware on an old web router to WPA without having to change the hardware, because it really is just web with the key changing. And both of them are fine. Use WPA, and nobody's getting in there without the key. So it's up to you to choose a key that isn't obvious, like PASSWRD or something. Yeah?
WPA2 is stronger?
Yes.
Slower?
Yes, WPA2 is definitely stronger. It uses better counter encryption, and it requires a mathematical coprocessor in the router.
Right?
It's what? Oh, it's faster, actually. The encryption is more efficient. But it won't run without special hardware. It's not in the old routers, that's all. Yeah, so for most situations, people say WPA2 is your best choice in modern equipment. It'll be fastest. In practice, as you probably noticed, if you turn off all the encryption, your speed doubles. So when I go to coffee houses where the network is terrible and stuff like that, and I have to connect to my phone, I turn off the encryption. I use MAC address filtering because I understand it's not encrypted and I don't care. The MAC address filtering is enough to stop the neighbors from using it. and that'll get enough speed. So this is a well-known fact, gamers know this. When you turn off all the encryption, your wireless network will run much faster. All these slow it down, but they also keep people from using it. So, all right, so if you just turn these things on, in the old days, you buy them, you get an open network. That is still true if you buy a router at the store. If you get it installed with your cable, it's typically WPA2 now. Like I got Comcast and it's just automatically WPA2. Anyway, the Wi-Fi protected setup is here. You can go turn it on and use it. It'll work with newer routers, but that's anything in the last 5 years. And here's recommended security procedures. Change the administrator password on your router. Change the SSID to something other than the default name, because that'll conceal what brand you have. If it's Linksys, you change it to Netgear or something, because there are a bunch of attacks that depend on the brand of the router. Don't let it be remotely administered, especially through the wireless network. So if people do connect wirelessly, you don't want them changing any settings on the router. There are firmware upgrades available from the manufacturer. Almost no routers automatically put them on, but it is a good idea to put them on because the routers use very vulnerable version of Linux. And you can use virtual private networks when you're using wireless connections, or HTTPS. This is a very good idea because that gives you another